Vishnu-padaya Krishna-prestaya Srimate Bhakti-vedanta Swami Namaste Saraswati Deve Gacchami Nirvise Sasunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine Jaya Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi. Whoops.
Hey.
That's the yoga essentials. Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Sri Advaita Gadadhara Srivasadi Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama
Having fun there. So, Bhagavad Gita. I think this is the longest series of lectures in the history of ISKCON on the first chapter. And you were there. You are actually experiencing it personally in Kumiville. So, here we go. I promised you, or warned you, we are going to have some interesting verses this time. And so let's see where we left off. Arjuna has begun giving his arguments against the fight, saying that we understand how bad this is. So even though the other side is fighting, they don't understand. They're ignorant, but we're not ignorant. So why should we do what ignorant people do? And of course, the answer is that, well, there was an intelligent reason to fight. On the other side, they were fighting for the wrong reason, but there were right reasons to fight. Okay, so now I think, let's see. I think we left off around. Okay, so I'll just do chapter 1, text 3940, just to kind of remind you of context. So in text 39, Arjuna says, Kulakshaye. He's saying when communities are destroyed, because if the battle goes on, then whole families, extended communities are going to be destroyed in this battle. So Kulakshaye pranashanti kuladharma sanatana. The eternal dharmas are destroyed when the family is destroyed. Dharme nashte, and when dharma is lost, kulam kritsnam, the entire community, adharmo vibhavatyuta, is overcome by adharma. Adharma overcomes the entire community. So dharma here, as I was explaining yesterday, actually, a class I gave to Brazil in Portuguese, that dharma means the laws of the universe. And there's the macrocosm and the microcosm, and there's, you could say, the megacosm, because the same laws that govern the universe also govern your life. In fact, in physical sciences, they call it the principle of uniformity, in the sense that, let's say, when scientists are studying galaxies or just sort of your basic cosmology, then they assume that the same physical laws that operate here on Earth or in your backyard, those same physical laws are operating throughout the universe. So, such as the force of gravity or the speed of light, and so on. And so, really, that same principle, the principle of universal laws that govern the universe, is true not only in the physical realm, it's true in the moral realm. It's true in the ethical realm. And I was explaining because in yoga, actually, I gave a class in which I thought I'm going to do something I don't think anyone ever does really, and that is just focus on the yamas and niyamas, and really just talk about that. And it's very interesting because in the Ashtanga Yoga, the first two steps, yama and niyama, are really moral principles. Asteya, like don't steal, and Sanyasteya kind of means in Sanskrit, thou shalt not steal, and all these different things. So why? Because if we violate the moral laws of the universe, then we will be thrown into confusion, into agitation. Or one of them also is brahmachari, which means to be chaste, not to be promiscuous. And it's interesting because, as we know, angas number 3 and 4, that asana and pranayama are obviously for controlling the body. So even if you just consider, because the first four steps of Ashtanga yoga are just actually preparation. They're just preparing you to actually do the cognitive work. And then you start with pratyahara and dharana and so on. So what's interesting is the steps 3 and 4 are about controlling, your sitting posture so you don't get cramps and you can sit comfortably for long periods of time, meditate. And then number 4 is the breathing, pranayama, which clearly means that there's a vital link between the condition of your body, what your body is doing, and your ability to engage in spiritual meditation. Those two things are obviously connected. Otherwise, where did number 2, 3, and 4 come from? And so it's interesting, if someone is promiscuous, as we know, promiscuity, just sort of like uncontrolled sexual activity or inappropriate sexual activity, it disturbs the body probably like about 1,000 times more than not breathing exactly right. I mean, I find I'm able to meditate, and I'm not saying, and I don't, I couldn't do pranayama to save my life. But still, somehow or other, I find I'm able to meditate. And so, it would be kind of absurd to think that I'm going to do asanas and pranayama to control the body so I can meditate, but then have no control over bodily activities that disturb the mind 100 times more. So anyway, there's all that. And so there are laws of the universe. Chastity, being sexually appropriate and chaste, is not just about, like they say, the definition of priest. It's some guy with a deep-rooted fear that someone, somewhere, is having fun. So, that's not the point. It's not just, that's so much fun, so we can't do it because religion just, it's there to make us miserable. The real point, it's neurological. It's not about religion, it's about neurology. Do the neurology. If you study the nature of your nervous system, if you see how your brain is wired and what actually happens neurologically when one is getting sexually aroused, it's kind of a no-brainer that if you want to have a serious spiritual life, it's not that you can, sex is completely forbidden. There's marriage and so on, and child begetting, but it's what's neurological, it's scientific. The chastity and goes with meditation, and you can't be a serious meditator. You can't be a serious yogi or yogini. You can't be a serious, really anything, except maybe like President of Russia. So anyway, so that's Arjun's concern, Kulakshaye, that if community, because it's communities that preserve principles. For example, my family, I was born in a Jewish family, and my father, although, he never preached to anyone in his life. I don't think he ever once in his entire life tried to convince somebody of anything religious. But he did follow the principles, like in certain holy days you fast, and he really did it. He was really so it's families. You learn about spiritual principles, you learn about morality, you learn about what a decent life is, usually in your family. And if you're very fortunate, if you do learn about it in your family, because then you learn at a young age and it gives you an advantage. It's not, you're not always trying to do bhakti with an accent, in the sense of if you learn a language very early. So families are important. Families are really the foundation of societies. And if the families are materialistic, then the society is materialistic. And if the families are spiritual, then society becomes spiritual. So Arjun's general point, he's bringing in general principles which have a lot of validity. He's just misapplying them. So Arjun, that's what he says. So then he says, Dharma Abhivavat Krishna. When adharma prevails and defeats dharma, then Pradushanti Kulastriya, the women of the family are polluted. Pradushanti, they're contaminated by inappropriate connections and so on. So it's interesting, why is Arjuna mentioning women? Why doesn't he say the men and the women become polluted? And which is, the obvious thing that people say nowadays. And actually, the purpose of the Hare Krishna movement is to destroy the patriarchy, as you know. So the fact that women are mentioned, I think I did talk about this last time, but I'll mention again. Then I want to get into the other verses, and that is because in the context that Arjuna is, it's good thing I told that in Russia joke before she went, because in the context that Arjuna is speaking about, women are more important. It's not that he's mentioning women not because they're inferior, but exactly the opposite, because in this particular context, they're more important. It's actually the women who raise children. I mean, men generally don't raise children. There are obviously exceptions to everything, but in general, women raise children. Men are off either in the fields plowing or doing business or, whatever they're doing. And it's the women who actually raise the children. And so, and also, as I said, I'm afraid to bring in science here because we live in a world in which extremists on both sides, left and right, regularly deny science. Because if you're an extremist, it means that you put ideology ahead of science. And if science contradicts your ideology, it's because the scientists are all fascists or something. So, but actually real science, what the studies show is that women are more impacted by promiscuity than men. They've done, this is science, so, don't kill the messenger. What they find is that the more sexual partners a woman has before a marriage, the more likely it is, sort of an exact proportion, the more likely it is that she will leave the marriage. And apparently didn't find that so much for men, who are kind of hopeless anyway. So whatever they do, they're kind of hopeless. So therefore, if you put these two facts together, that women generally raise children. Obviously, the father plays an important role. I don't want to minimize that. A good father is a very important component in the successful raising of a child. But the women are more important because the women actually raise the children. And women are more impacted negatively by promiscuity. That's just the way the world is. So therefore, that's Arjuna's concern. It's not that you could say, well, women are, like sometimes we read women are more easily seduced. I'm not sure that's the case. It's, men, it takes a lot to get a man aroused, like you say the word "the," or if you turn the lights on, or if you cough, or it takes a lot to make a man lusty. So the way I understand this, it's not about who's better and who's worse. It's not about who's more easily misled. I think it's just about practical neurology and sociology, and about trying to preserve future generations or trying to raise good generations so the world doesn't go more to hell than it already has. So that's that verse. Whoops. Well, why not? You know about my multiple personalities, right? So the next verse is then, so Pradushanti Kulastriya, the women of the community are contaminated, and then Strishu Dushtasu Varsneya. When women are contaminated or polluted or just whatever word you, then Jayate Varna Sankara. Here Arjuna introduces the notion of Varna Sankara. Prabhupada translates it non-literally as unwanted progeny. Literally in Sanskrit it means Varna mixing. Varna means Varnas, like Brahmanas, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas, and Shudras, and Sankara means mixing in Sanskrit. In other words, a higher class woman marries a lower class man, and or a lower class woman marries a higher class man. Because now what's interesting here is that Arjuna doesn't say the women are the cause of the Varna Sankara. So again, you can read in all kinds of things here which make women look bad, but that's not actually what Arjuna is saying. What Arjuna is actually saying is that when women are contaminated, then this Varna, you get Varna mixing arises. So, and again, Arjuna doesn't say it's the woman's fault and doesn't say it's the men's fault. It's just that's what men and women do. And so you could say, what's the problem here with Varna mixing? Because we live in an egalitarian age in which we pretend that everyone's equal. I mean, people are equal in terms of, let's say, equal rights, equal justice before the law. But to say people have equal abilities is obviously not true. I mean, there are competitive colleges, where most, 93% of the applicants don't get in or something. And people compete for jobs, and most of the people don't get the good jobs, and most of the people don't get into the good colleges, and most of the teams don't win the World Series, and most of the teams don't win the Super Bowl, and most of the teams don't win the NBA championship or the World Cup, going international here. So it's just, it's in the real world. People have different levels of abilities. People have different levels of intelligence. That's a scientific fact. It's a scientific fact that people have dramatically different levels of intelligence, and we can measure that. So the purpose, the arranged marriages, which also, I mean, in this ancient culture, we see very clearly in the Mahabharata and Bhagavatam that men and women sometimes eloped. Actually, sometimes, especially the royal class. So it's in fact, it's listed as one of the Vedic forms of marriage as just kind of eloping. In fact, probably the two most famous elopers in Vedic history are Arjuna and Krishna's own sister Subhadra, who eloped. Of course, it was an appropriate marriage, but still, they just ran, drove off in a chariot. I guess with not without the sign in the back, the cans on the back, and the sign says, California or bust. But they did. they did just ride off in a chariot. So these appropriate marriage, but even that they married within their varna. So what's the big deal about marrying within your varna and not mixing the varnas, which is the literal meaning of varna sankara? The point is, it is what I call sort of organic genetic engineering, where a society is consciously creating super people. So that if you have a Brahmin community that marries within their community, endogamous marriage, to use the anthropology term, as opposed to exogamous. You will be tested on those words. Stop for a second, everyone want to write that down? Endogamous, exogamous. Anyway, so you develop very, very like these super Brahmins and super Kshatriyas. And since the Brahmins have to teach everyone, provide everyone knowledge, and the Kshatriyas have to protect everyone, having super Kshatriyas, warriors, governors, and super Brahmins is not a bad idea. In fact, it's interesting because, I mean, the proof that these things really exist out there is not just, Prabhupada came to America and he opened it up for everybody. It was like, everyone had a chance to become a Brahmin. Because in India, the system of these four classes, it fossilized. It became degraded into a strictly hereditary system. And inevitably, when you have children, one's a lemon, sometimes two are lemons. And it's not always clear how you make kitty lemonade, how you make lemonade out of your useless kid. So, no offense to anyone. So, but Prabhupada just opened it up to everyone. We're in India, it's very strict. Like you have to be born in this family. So Prabhupada just said, prices are slashed. Everyone can become a Brahmin. Anyone that wants to, just step right up and you can be a Brahmin, which is, in India, is a big deal. It's this very high social class. And so, of course, that was the late 60s, early 70s. The Beatles went to Rishikesh, and Jimi Hendrix had a universal form on his album cover. And so, thousands of people apparently heeded the call. Thousands of people joined the Hare Krishna movement all around the world. Literally all around the world. Thousands and thousands and thousands. Who actually became like monks. They wore that, that amazingly fashionable conservative dress that some devotees wear. The ultimate fashion statement, right? And so thousands and thousands of people joined, but lo and behold, over time, it turned out the overwhelming majority, in fact, were not Brahmins. I mean, they were given a chance. Everyone got the same chance. But if you ask a simple question, which would require a statistical answer, if you ask the question of the thousands and thousands of young people and a few older people that Prabhupada initiated, how many of them were able to sustain a Brahminical life? And the percentage is going to be very low. I mean, it's going to be single digits. We'll just put it in those terms. It's going to be a single digit, the percentage. And so what that shows is that there really is such a thing as a born Brahmin. And so when you have somebody who's just born with those qualities, and then that person gets the proper training, like they're born scientists, they're born mathematicians, they're born artists, they're born dancers, they're born athletes. And it's, of course, and then if they get the proper training. Oh. So then if they get the proper training, if you have the natural ability and you get the training, you excel. And so that's what Arjuna is concerned about. He's talking about actually a very scientific society. I mean, there's so many things that were much more scientific back then. Take, for one example, language. Take the alphabet. The Roman alphabet that we use, if you're a linguist, if you actually know phonology, the English alphabet is just total chaos. Whereas the Sanskrit alphabet is actually a scientific phonetic chart. Like take the English alphabet. It starts out with A, the way we pronounce it, which is a diphthong. It's actually two vowels, A and E, A. And then you have B, which is a soft labial consonant with the long I sound, B, and then C, which is a sibilant. It goes all over the place. Whereas in Sanskrit, you get all the vowels, Sanskrit alphabet. You get first the simple vowels, then you get the diphthongs and the triphthongs, like simple vowel sounds, e, u, and so on. And then after that, if you look at the Sanskrit alphabet chart, you get what are called in English phonology the gutturals, like ka, ka, ga, ga, na. And anyway, it's all actually scientific, because maybe I'll just go on for 30 more seconds. If you can't stand anymore, just raise your hand. But the way we make consonants is that your tongue presses against the palate at a certain point and then releases the air. And then, like, for example, not the tongue, actually, I'm sorry. If you say ka, and notice where you're closing your mouth up at the back in the back, ka. And then if you say cha, the point of contact is moving toward the front of your mouth. And then if you say ta, it's coming even farther forward, ta, and then you say pa, it's labial because it comes out your lips. So when you make consonants, they start way in the back of your palate, and they move forward to your lips. And so they knew all this in Sanskrit. And so the alphabet is a phonetic chart. And there's hard consonants, there's soft consonants, there are aspirated, unaspirated consonants, like for example, in the Sanskrit alphabet, you have ka, just a simple K, and then KH, ka. And so in English, we have all these things in English. We just no one knows it, unless you're a phonologist. Like, for example, if you say the word Kate, like Katie, compare the K sound you make when you say Kate to the K sound you make when you say skate. When you say Kate, you're breathing out more. When you say skate, you're not. And so in the word Kate, it's an aspirated K, and in the word skate, it's an unaspirated K. So they knew all this. And actually, the Sanskrit alphabet chart is a scientific phonology lesson. So, I mean, in terms of linguistics, they were far, far, far ahead of us. And in terms of, they didn't have this romanticist idea that, sexual intercourse, especially in the case of reproduction, is a totally private act. No, it's not. Because when you reproduce, you bring, a little angel or a little monster into the world, or something in between. And then society has to live with that person. If children are not begotten under appropriate circumstances, not raised properly, then they will, they may kill someone, they prey on society, they may kill themselves, they may become dysfunctional, and therefore society has to pay for them. So I already went over this in another class, that when you are engaged in a behavior which powerfully affects other people, your behavior is not just private. And when it negatively impacts society has a rational interest in it. And so, therefore, if we can get past the actually recent idea, it's a very recent idea, this sort of like stupidly romantic idea that when you reproduce children or have sexual intercourse, that, obviously it's private in the sense, close the door, pull the curtains. Yeah, it's private. But the point is, the impacts are not private. Especially, and even if sexual intercourse does not bring about a child, it still impacts society, because the statistic I already gave you, that in a promiscuous society, people are unable to sustain relationships in marriage. Just, do the neurology, go read the science. And when people have trouble sustaining marriages, children are brought up under less than optimum conditions. And we know that when children are brought up in broken families, some of them turn out wonderfully, but a disproportionate number of them end up, to use a colloquial, screwed up. And by that I mean they're much more likely to commit suicide, they're much more likely to commit violent crime, to be impoverished and therefore have to tax other citizens to pay for them. And there's a whole list of negative impacts. So therefore, the idea that when a man and woman have sexual contact, it's nobody's business. What about all the people who are affected by it? And as I said, the battle cry of the American Revolution was no taxation without representation. And certain behaviors tax society, literally tax society, end up with innocent people being killed. So this romantic idea was really, it's only about 200 years old, really. Or at most, 250 years old out of, tens of thousands of years of human history. In the last 200, 250 years, they have this romantic idea that it's just nothing matters but love. Even if all the numbers show we will get divorced, we will screw up our kids, and we will be miserable, but none of that matters. So to call our society a rational or a scientific society is what they call in Spanish un chiste de mal gusto. It's just a bad joke. But then again, as Hegel points out, people are notoriously unable to objectively judge the world in which they live because we're so immersed in it. I mean, obviously, if you're left or right, maybe you don't like people on the other side, people have political, but in terms of an overall evaluation of our society, people generally are not able to do that. It's just like if you're inside a body and you're feeling some pain or something, unless you're really an incredible doctor, you should probably go to a doctor. And even if you are a doctor, you should probably go to a doctor. Even yoga teachers take yoga classes, right? And so in the same way, unless you're really, really trained in many ways to be able to look at contemporary history objectively, you're probably missing a lot. And I bring up all that because Arjuna is not just making crazy statements, Varna mixing, that's, we don't do that. He's actually speaking from the point of view of valid sociology. He's not just making crazy statements. So then Arjuna's going to get into this. He's on a roll here, as we say in present time. Sankaro. So mixing, he just says the Sankaro, mixing. He means Varna mixing. Sankaro Narakayeva can only lead to hell. That's what he says. Mixing only leads to hell. Kula Gnanam, for the killers of communities and for the community. Because obviously there's like this abominable karma for people that cause the destruction of community dharma. So they're ruined by karma, and then the communities themselves are ruined. Patanti Pitaro Yesham, the forefathers fall, literally. And this is very interesting. There was actually this is a fascinating concept which you may not have learned about. And that is, why do people worship forefathers? Which is very prominent in Asia, by the way, China, Japan, India. The West kind of, they don't care that much. But especially in the East, in Asia, most of Asia, they really, really take their ancestors much more seriously. So the idea was that if you're born in a good family, the Vedic culture has built-in incentives to get you to perpetuate the family moral principles. For example, my parents were born a generation. They went through the Depression, they went through World War II, and they were very self-controlled, that whole generation. I know in the community I lived in, hundreds and hundreds of families. I didn't know anyone was divorced. And so they were very disciplined. They did their duty. It wasn't all about me. That, it's not like I'm perfect the way I am. I mean, if you said that, they would have thought that, you need psychiatric attention. To say something like I'm perfect the way I am. I mean, who's such a fool to say that? I mean, we all need to advance. We all need to progress. So anyway, but my generation kind of deviated, the notorious, much loved and hated boomers. So the Vedic culture had these built-in incentives to get people to follow family traditions, which were supposed to be Vedic traditions, and that is when your elders pass away, say your grandparents, if they themselves had led, that's harsh. If his name is harsh. So if your ancestors or your grandparents, whatever, great grandparents, if they live good lives, then they go to this place called Pitarloka, which is the world of the ancestors. And the idea is that they can stay up there. Their ability to stay in that higher world depends on the people who come after them and their family performing the Shraddha ceremony, which is a ceremony which you offer to the ancestors. And so that way, if you have children, you are very, very highly motivated to get your children to follow the Vedic principles and to perform these ceremonies and rituals, follow these principles, because if they do, if you can get your descendants, your children, to follow these principles, then you get to stay in these higher worlds. But if in your family people stop following this, you come crashing down to the earth, which is kind of a punishment. So therefore, both the elders, they were really highly motivated to not neglect in the education of their children and grandchildren, to not neglect these higher principles. Now, in Krishna consciousness, we don't do that, because the best thing you can do for yourself and for everyone else, the best thing you can do is become Krishna conscious. Because if you become Krishna conscious, you can not only keep your ancestors aloft in these higher worlds, but you can actually lead them to liberation. But that's what Arjuna's talking about. That's why he says the forefathers fall. Because if people start doing bad marriages where, okay, well, I come from a Sudra background, and this, we don't do that ceremony, where I came from a Brahmin background, and we do this. It's just like typically you get marriages, but say like the man and woman are from different religions, and often the kid just kind of falls through the cracks. Or okay, the kid chooses, or maybe you do it the mother. And so it's not the same. I'm not saying that all people in those situations turn out badly. Some of them turn out very well, but I'm just saying that when you don't have, when the parents aren't really united, they haven't been trained the same way, they don't share the same culture, then it's a big problem. It also leads to divorce. I'd say the main problem, I'd say the main cause of divorce in the modern world is cultural. Because it used to be, I know my parents' generation, if a man and woman married, they knew exactly what their duties are. There were no surprises. The man knew exactly what he could do, what he couldn't do, what his duty was. The woman knew what her, and so everyone agreed. They wouldn't have big arguments because everyone agreed on what they had to do and what the other person had to do. There was cultural agreement. But nowadays, where everyone you sort of like roll your own culture, everyone just, you invent your own culture. You get all these incredibly naive, pretentious people in the world who actually think they can invent a functional culture. And so, everyone just does what they want, and everyone is free, and everyone is blah, 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 blah. And, and most of these people are not very bright, don't have a lot of, they have very little wisdom. And so you get a husband and wife, and the wife says, well, I can do this. And the man says, well, no, I'm not happy. Yeah, but I have a right to do that. They don't agree on culture. They don't agree on the rules of the game. You can't play a soccer game if the two teams disagree on what the rules are. And so having a marriage where the man and woman don't even agree on the rules of the game, we'll work things out as we come to them. Yeah, and usually often working things out means going to a divorce lawyer. Or people don't even bother getting married because, why bother? Why not just friendship with benefits, as I say. So this idea, people have this idea nowadays, they can just invent human culture. And they can't. First of all, they don't have the intelligence. Secondly, even if you are intelligent, you can't do it. because it takes centuries of life experience to come up with these things. Centuries. It's just like you take these giant redwood trees that took thousands of years to grow, and some moron, comes and wants to chop it down. What did Ronald Reagan famously said? "Oh, you've seen one giant redwood, you've seen them all." That was no comment. So I mean, just like we all feel the tragedy of a tree that took thousands of years to grow, and then some idiot comes and just cuts it down. What about cultural principles that took centuries or thousands of years to develop, and then one generation, "Oh, no, that's just nonsense. We don't have to do that. I'm free." They don't know what they're doing. So, I mean, we live in an age of just mass ignorance. And that's why people are so miserable. That's why, I mean, they take polls. 80% of Americans think we're going in the wrong direction. But everyone, of course, thinks that my neighbors are going in the wrong direction. So here in Krishna Consciousness, this is called Sanatana Dharma. Arjuna uses that term, eternal principles. They've already figured it out. It's like the old saying, if everything else fails, read the directions. And so in these literatures, we have the directions. So we don't have to, invent our own culture. We can't do it anyway. And when people, try to get together, stay together in a relationship, in a marriage, the fact it works or not, it really is about whether they share culture. Can they agree on the most important things? If they don't, it's a ticking time bomb. Of course, when people are totally drugged with endorphins, DUI, with love endorphins, they just, these drugs just overwhelm all of your common sense. So, friends don't let friends, drink endorphins and drive. Anyway, so Arjuna says here, Sankaro narakayaiva kulagnanam kulasyacha, mixing leads only to hell, both for the killers of communities and the community. The forefathers fall. The forefathers of these people fall. Lupta pindodaka kriya, because the rites, the rituals, pindodaka, in which you offer. Pindaka is like a little ball, food, a little ball you offer, and udaka is water. And so lupta means they're interrupted, or because these offerings are interrupted or they're ruined, people stop doing them, and then the forefathers fall, which I already explained. So then, doshai tai kulagnanam, by these mistakes, by these bad deeds of family killers, of community killers, destroyers of communities, varna sankara karakai, which is by these mistakes which are caused by varna mixing. Because you people marry who have different sets of duties, different understandings of life, different, you could say in a sense, religious activities. And, if they want to keep peace in the family, okay, we have to compromise. This means you end up not really doing either of them very well. And then culture just collapses to be replaced by hedonism. Everyone just out there like a pig trying to get whatever they can for themselves. Also known as capitalism. Also known as consumerism. It's a fancy word for pig. The shadow knows. Mm-hmm. So, and then utsadyante jati dharma. Arjuna says the dharmas associated with different birth communities are destroyed. All these dharmas that civilize and regulate human beings, all these rites and ceremonies are destroyed. I could say a lot more about modern culture. It's just like, where do you stop? But I will stop. So And then Kula Dharmas Shastra, and then the perennial family dharmas are ruined. So then Arjuna says, Utsanna Kula Dharmanang Manushanang Janardana, O Janardana Krishna, Narake Niyatang Vaso, the perpetual residence for those who destroy community and family dharmas. For those people, O Krishna, their residence is perpetually in hell, or is fixed in hell. In other words, they're going to hell for this. Hell is not eternal, but it's very unpleasant. So, Bhavati Anushushama, and Arjuna says, this is the way it is, and Anushushama, we have heard this from authorities. So Arjuna said, this is not my idea, we have heard this from authorities. And then the last 3 verses of this chapter, and we will have completed. Aho bata mahat papa. Aho bata means like, oh my God. It's like, he said, what great sin kartum yavasitavayam we are determined to commit. What great sin we are determined to commit. Yadraja sugalobena, out of a greed for royal happiness. Again, Arjuna has totally misunderstood why Krishna is doing this. It's not to enjoy, it's not out of greed for royal happiness or opulence, it's to save the world from injustice. So Yadraja sugalobena hantung sajanamudita, we are prepared. We are like, because the battle's going to start any second. Here we are, prepared to kill our own people because of our greed for royal pleasures. And then Arjuna makes his last erroneous statement. He said, Jadimam apratikaram shastram shastrapanaya dhartarashtranehan yustanmik shimataramgave. It would be better for me if the sons of Dhritarashtra killed me in battle with weapons in their hands, killed me with no weapon. In other words, if I just put down my weapons, unresisting, not fighting back, and if they, with their weapons in hand, kill me, unresisting, he said, that would be a greater good for me. Tanmek shema tarambave, that would be a greater good for me. If I just don't resist and they kill me, which is kind of the philosophy of the pacifists, right? So Sanjay Uvacha, so Arjuna, this great warrior, the greatest warrior in the world, suddenly has become a pacifist. So Sanjay Uvacha, Evam Uttarjunak Sankhe Ratopasta Upavisha Visija Sashanam Trapam Shokasam Vigna Manasa. So having spoken thus on the battlefield, Arjuna, sitting on the chariot, situated on the chariot, he sat down. Upavisha. He just sat down. He couldn't even stand. Visrija, casting aside his bow and arrows. Shokasam Vigna Manasa, his mind completely disturbed with grief. So that's the end of the first chapter of Bhagavad Gita. It's an amazing book. Huh?
Just more 17. We just have to end in more 17.
More 17?
It's just the first one. Right?
Oh, the other 17.
Yeah.
There's 7th chapter. Right. Absolutely. So, any questions on these topics? Yes, please.
Thank you so much for the class, Maharaj. So if we are coming from like different cultures, we're already like mixed up like nowadays. How can we like
¿Cómo no?
keep it up? Yeah. like try to do, like, do we have to like really like be very careful with our partner, or we just lost hope about it?
Yeah,
What do we
probably
do?
the best thing is just
We are
lose,
like,
give up all hope. That's really what I'm trying to explain to you.
People.
Okay, I mean, it's a very good question. Of course, none of us are perfect. What's that old saying? If I was just a little more humble, I'd be perfect. So, just joking. So, we have to be guided by these stars. We have to know what is right and wrong. And then all of us, we do the best we can, but we have to know what is right and wrong. And nowadays, in the age of collective narcissism, where everyone is perfect the way they are, you can't say that anything is wrong because it might negatively impact someone's inflated self-esteem. Although you are allowed to say something's wrong if it's not politically correct. But if it is politically correct, you're not allowed to say it's wrong. Those basically the rules. So, yeah, we have to try our best because that's what Krishna Consciousness really is about. It's Bhakti Yoga. You know, Bhakti, of course, but Bhakti Yoga means you practice. Aristotle said that you develop virtue by practicing it. So in the name of just our inflated egos, we shouldn't pretend that what's right is not right or what's wrong is right. We should have the courage to face reality. We should have the courage to see what's right and wrong, even if we don't have the strength to always do what's right. But we're not doing any favor to ourselves by pretending that what's wrong is right or that what's right is just sort of optional. You know, we should have the courage and the strength to see what's right and then start walking in that direction. No one's perfect, and it takes a while. But if you don't admit to yourself what's really right and wrong, you can't even go in the right direction. So Krishna, you know, we have a huge advantage because Krishna, as in the SPOG, you know, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. It's so yeah, that's why the real qualification to advance in Krishna consciousness is not that you be perfect now, not that you have all qualifications. It's just you have a basic honesty. You're not going to deny the truth because it doesn't feed your ego. And nowadays, everyone's treated like a little delicate snowflake. If you breathe too hard on it, it'll disintegrate. But the point is, we should openly admit to ourselves what our strong points are, areas we need to improve. What areas really, maybe there's some things in our life that are not appropriate. And whether or not you can get rid of it right away, things that are inappropriate and destructive and harmful to you, we should at least have the integrity and the honesty to admit the truth and then start working toward it. Otherwise, you're just putting vanity above truth. Yes, ma'am.
So I have a question about that term, Varna Sankara,
Yes.
and about the explanation of how that dilutes the appearance and the power of the structure of society. And I was thinking, because And I just want to put a couple of examples and just want to ask you what your thoughts on. So the argument is that when there's interbreeding in a way, when things are mixing, the power is diluted. And just from a couple of things that I've seen in seeds, in animals, and also in humans, in many sciences, when they're creating super seeds, they actually take seeds from different species and interbreed so that the power is strengthened. So does this in animals, right, too? And in humans, when there's a lot of interbreeding, there's a higher chance of like diseases showing up. So that's why
When higher chance in what case?
of diseases being like of genetic diseases.
Right. In
being
which case?
manifested.
In which case?
For example,
When they don't mix.
when they do mix.
When they do mix.
So for
Right.
example, cousins
Right.
procreate. There's a higher chance of genetic diseases being
Right.
manifested. So I just wanted to ask about that argument.
Okay. Good. That's good. I would say the benefits of, let's say, two people that marry not just being identical, those benefits are there anyway. Because, for example, let's say, like take Yudhisthira and Draupadi, just to give an example. Yudhisthira was sort of almost like too Brahminical. He was supposed to be a warrior and a king, but he was always kind of philosophizing about everything and wanted to take a humble approach. And then Draupadi, he married Draupadi, who was, a great woman, also fiery, and it was good for him. So the benefits of, let's say, bringing different qualities together, those benefits are there, first of all, even within a particular varna. That's the first thing I'll say. And secondly, because there are cases of varna sankara in the literature, and if the combination somehow, because not all combinations are good, in botany or in zoology or anything else, some combinations are catastrophic and just cause the extinction of both. So, yeah, we do have to be open to, because let's say, for example, someone is born in a Vaishya, let's say a man is born in a Vaishya community, which is sort of mercantile or farmer community, but has very Brahminical qualities. Then if you judge by the qualities themselves, not just their official status, and also people are different, and I think even today, in marriages, I think the best marriages are marriages in which the two are complementary and not just identical. So I think the principle of complementarity is a valid principle, and it occurs complementarity even among people from the same varna, where the mix is complementary, not just. Actually, there's one famous story. There was a lady. This is actually in the old Upanishads. It's a very ancient story. There was a lady named Jabala, and she was promiscuous, and I don't know if she got paid for what she was doing, but she was definitely out and about, let us say. And so she had a son who got a matronym, a name based on his mother's name, which is Jaibali, from Jabala. And so this Jaibali, he had a very strong Brahminical nature, even though his mother was like really at the bottom of society, almost like unclassified. You couldn't say she's Sudra. She was kind of like, unclassified, so low. And so he said to his mother one day when he was young that I want to go study with a great sage. And it's just like today, if you fill out a college application, the first box is last name. So it was the same thousands of years ago. What's your gotra? And Gotra actually meant, your last name. What's your family line? So his mother said, that's an interesting question. And then, because he asked me, who's my father? And she said, yeah, I wish I knew. So, when a woman doesn't know who the father of her child is, that kind of tells you a lot about her lifestyle. When she's not sure exactly which guy is the father of her child. So she said, well, I don't really know who your father is. So they ask, she's a simple lady. If they ask you that, just say that your mother's name is Jabala and therefore you're Jaibali. He said, okay. So he went off and he found this famous guru. And the guru said, where do you come from? Who's your father? And so the funny thing is, this Jaibali exactly repeated his mother said. That's a very interesting question. And I asked my mother that very question. And she said she wasn't sure who my father was, but since her name is Jabala, you can call me Jaibali. And so the guru was amazed at the honesty of the boy. Because in that very conservative society, it was like, there's nothing you could say which would put you in a worse light. And he was just completely honest. Never considered lying, never considered half lying, just told the truth. And then the guru said, you are so honest. You are so honest that you are actually a Brahmin. And he accepted him, and that Jaibali became a famous Vedic sage.
So it's more about the qualities.
Absolutely.
About the social, economic status
Absolutely.
of a class of person.
Absolutely. In fact, Krishna says it over and over again. He says, Chatur Varnyam Mayastistam Guna Karma Vibhagasha. That I have created this Varna system according to the qualities of people, the qualities of the person and the karma, the way they work, their natural inclinations to work. And then Krishna brings up this topic again in chapter 18 of the Gita, where he says that he describes the duties of all the four Varnas. And in each case, he says that their duties are svabhavaja, born of their nature, not of their birth, of their nature. So to say that people should, but of course when people are lusty and sexually attracted to someone else, even when they think it's, L-O-V-E, then their brains kind of turn to liquid and they can make inappropriate decisions because, the brain shuts down. Too many endorphins. It's like, it's like when your car gets flooded and the motor won't start, the motor gets flooded. So when endorphins flood your mind, basically your rational abilities shut off. And so, está bien. Sucede en las mejores sampradayas. So even among people who may not be born officially in the same Varna, but if their nature is compatible. And again, what you're talking about generally is the advantages of complementarity rather than just identity. And that's there. That's definitely there. I think people back then, many of them were intelligent enough to marry someone who they felt would just kind of maybe balance me or complement me, as opposed to just being the same as me. But then again, you have to make sure the other person is okay with complementarity. Because if the other person is not looking for complementarity, is looking for unison, and you were looking for complementarity, that's not going to work either. So nowadays, in an age when people don't share culture, everyone kind of invents their own. You need a lot of information before making a decision to share your life with someone. Otherwise, you may just share your divorce lawyers.
Thank you for answering that question.
Sure. And just one last point. Cultural sharing also doesn't imply the same personality type. There's people of widely different personality types can share a culture. Just like, let's say people are on a baseball team, to give a sort of not uniquely American example, but hasn't really caught on so much elsewhere outside the Latin America and Japan. But, people can have, in any sport, say soccer, people can have very different styles, very different ways of playing, but there's the same rules for everyone. So having the same rules and the same basic culture in no way implies that people are identical. So that's the answer. Yes. Expect a harsh question here.
Thanks for a wonderful class, could you mentioned how our becoming devotees were more inclined toward cultivating a relationship with Krishna can save our ancestors also. Can you talk a little bit more about that, given that they've already gone before us?
Yeah, but they have a future too. I mean, they're not gone. They left this planet, but they're as alive as you are. And they face the same uncertainty about the future as you do. So Krishna throws that in. It's kind of like a nice little incentive. Hey, don't worry about all your ancestors. Just surrender to me and I'll take care of it. So it's a very nice gesture on Krishna's part. Yes, ma'am.
I have a very simple question, and perhaps I have heard of the explanation before, but I guess I'm looking for validation or really to hear from you. So we all know Arjuna is a very elevated soul, and for him to be in such a confused, disturbed, and as you mentioned so many times, have so many erroneous statements, is that really just for the sake of the Bhagavad Gita song to happen?
Yes.
Is that
Yeah.
Krishna provoked that into
That's the generally that's the way the devotees understand it. This way Prabhupada taught that, because Krishna wanted this Gita to come about, and so he chose his devotee to make the big mistake. So that, because he knew, being a devotee, that he would accept correction, he would accept the enlightening explanation.
Thank you.
Yes,
I have one last question
go for it.
about the word varna.
Yes.
So I wanted to learn a little bit more about the different meanings of varna.
Yes.
Because I know that it's used a lot in the way of categorizing society in terms of class. But I also understand that it's the quality of a person.
Varna,
Or am I? How would you describe the meaning of varna?
well, Varna can mean color, like Krishna Varnam, the color of Krishna. So there was an academic theory for a while that therefore this Vedic culture was racist because it talks about Varnas, but then scholars were a little more on the ball, pointed out, no, that's not wrong, because that's wrong, because if you look at the actual Vedas, it's not used to mean color. It's used to mean, and the differences between Varnas are not racial, they're cultural differences. So it can mean that. Varnayanti, there's a verb, varna, which means to speak or describe. So yeah, it has different meanings. But in this context, Arjuna is clearly talking about the social divisions, the vocational divisions. Anything else? Going. Okay, thank you all very much. Thank you for attending. All right. Hey, you finished the first question?
I just appreciated that take on the last few verses of the Gita. Not so much a question, but just an appreciation. Thank you.
So I guess I'll end this here. Thank you all, those of you who are watching digitally. Hare Krishna.